Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have an incredible show today. Settle in your seats, grab some water. You're going to want to listen to the entire show. We have really brought on a couple of true leading experts, trailblazers in the field. We've been able to book Dr. J.T. Kostman and Brian Gallagher, the co-founders of ProtectedBy.AI. Let me give you a little introduction about these gentlemen. It's absolutely unbelievable. We've been able to get them on the show. Dr. Kostman is a worldwide leader in the field of artificial intelligence and cognitive thinking. And Brian Gallagher, you've probably heard of Brian. He's a trailblazer in the field of security and risk management. They're doing such great work with their business and their company, ProtectedBy.AI. They're best-selling authors. We're going to get into it all in just a little bit. But again, it's absolutely incredible to have you both on the show. Brian, I want to start with you because I just want to pull the lens back just a little bit and tell the viewing audience and tell the people listening on the podcast as well how you and Dr. J.T. Kostman have gotten together to put together ProtectedBy.AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about that and really discuss that. So one of the things that you'll hear with talking to both myself and my business partner and one of my true best friends, JT, is we really came from similar backgrounds. So I've always been an entrepreneur at heart ever since I was a kid, and a lot of that had to do with my upbringing. And early on, my dad was a business owner, an entrepreneur, and lost his company, and we ended up actually going homeless. And I said, I never want that for me or my family. And so very much into business and looking for opportunities. But 9/11 happened, and for me, that was really a turning point in my career, my direction. And after 9/11, I went into the U.S. Secret Service and really focused on technical security. So anything from explosives on one side to electronic countermeasures and cybersecurity on another. That was really where I spent a majority of my time for about a decade, and that just allowed me to travel the world and see needs, both in industry and within government. But after about a decade of that, I went into being really a serial entrepreneur and focused in international business, staying in that whole world of security, some in cybersecurity and physical security. And it was about a few years back, I was looking at really this need for frontier technologies. And looking at the growing industry, this intersection of cybersecurity and physical security and big data and artificial intelligence. And I went online and I did a Google search, probably similar to you. And I said, who is the leading expert in this space, the applied artificial intelligence and cognitive computing and experience in government and intelligence? And lo and behold, the name that popped up was the other person in this interview, and that was Dr. J.T. Kostman. And I said, you know what, that name sounds really familiar. And, when we have more time, or maybe we'll dig into it a little bit today, but J.T. and I, our paths crossed about 10 years prior, again, when I was working for the Secret Service and he was working for the intelligence community. And I'll let him get in and tell a little bit of his background and that story, but that's really what brought us together to where we're at today.
Brian, that's an incredible story. Obviously, the family story resonates because you wanted to do something for yourself and your family. And 9/11 came around. It really focused you in on what you wanted to do and how you wanted to approach your life. And it's really fascinating. Dr. Kostman, now Dr. Kostman has told me that I could call him JT, so I'm going to call him JT for the rest of the interview. JT, welcome to the show. What I'd like for you to do to start the show is pull the lens back to 30,000 feet, if you don't mind, and tell us about ProtectedBy.AI.
Sure, I would love to. ProtectedBy.AI, I would love to take all the credit for it, but the credit really goes to my business partner, to my co-founder, best friend, Brian. As he mentioned, our paths crossed in, I think it was 2010, 2011. And it was one of those Jack Bauer moment kind of a stories. Literally, we ended up saving the life of the president and everyone rejoiced and it was all good. And he was working for the Secret Service at the time. I was working in the US intelligence community. And we became friends. We talked a little bit. We laughed. We had some good times. And then we parted ways. Well, about a decade later, my phone rings and it's this guy. And he said, you know, I know I'm looking at your profile and I see that you're just sitting on boards and I know you, so you must be bored. How about getting off the bench and getting back in the game? I want to create a new company that uses AI and frontier technologies to protect people, property, places, and profits. And he knew me and he knew that would resonate with me. See, like Brian, I have a somewhat similar background. I started out as a homeless kid living on the streets of New York, and then I got into computers in the 1970s, got tired of working in basements, and made a weird career for myself. Over the course of the last many years, I was a paramedic, a police officer, a deep sea diver. I ended up being with the U.S. Army Special Forces, and I've always had this commitment to serve and to be able to give back. And even when I went on to my professional career in the arena I'm in now, I went back, got some degrees. I'm a data scientist, a mathematician, a psychologist, and working at the intersection of those, whether for Samsung, where I was the chief data scientist, Time Inc., I was the chief data officer. But then for the U.S. intelligence, defense, and security agencies, I built a bunch of those capabilities, and frankly, I missed it. I missed being of service. I missed doing something to help people. And the line Brian got me with, I kid you not, was what I want to do, he told me, is arm Davids with slingshots to combat the Goliathan forces they face. And in fact, I'll tell you, he literally sent me a slingshot. He said, I need a new tech version of this. I need to be able to create some frontier technologies that will help what will be our clients and the countries that will serve combat all those forces that are allied against them. I'm tired of just the fortunate few and the Fortune 50 having those capabilities. Can we bring that to Protected by AI? That was the genesis of our company.
JT, I love it. It's so interesting. You started thinking about protecting people and property, places, and profit. I love that so much. You've put together an incredible platform. We're going to talk about it momentarily, but Brian, I want to go to you for a minute, and I don't know if you can discuss it, but something that JT said, our viewers are just going to be thinking about, so I might as well just nail it right now. He mentioned that you saved the life of a president. I mean, we have to get that out on the table. If you can't talk about it because it's classified, I totally understand it, Brian, but please tell us that story quickly, and then we'll move on to what Protected by AI is doing to be the David with the slingshots.
No, absolutely. I'll give you the highlights. And what JT and I always say is it's always better over a scotch. But the short story of it was, I believe it was 2010, 2011. It was the APEC Summit, the Asian Pacific Economic Conference, and it was happening in Hawaii, the island of Oahu. I had been stationed out there working with my team, with the Secret Service, and JT was working back in Northern Virginia with the intelligence community. JT was actually tasked working with an FBI group and built a system. This is where we'll have to stay high level here, but basically looking at social media for different pieces of information. And his team found a credible threat, and that threat was against President Obama in Hawaii. And JT, made his phone calls, and it went up and through the channel and over to Hawaii and ultimately down to my team. My team on the ground was responsible for hazardous materials. So anything from explosives to chemical and nuclear, biological threats. So when JT's team had the intelligence that there was explosives on scene, we got dispatched out. And I think it was within about 8 minutes from the time he got the intelligence to the time that the situation was taken care of. So really it's, I like to tell people that most of the job was suits and sunglasses, but occasionally we got to got to have some fun like that. So.
Brian, that's a wonderful story. You and JT collaborated and you remain friends and now business partners ever since. It's absolutely amazing. The two of you have really navigated more real life and death situations than just about anybody in the business today. You know, as JT said, your story is filled with Jack Bauer type moments. JT, when we think about, you know, this technology that you've been able to put together, it's very interesting because what I'm hearing is that you wanted to put something together with Brian that allows smaller companies the opportunity to have the similar type of protective technology as Fortune 500 companies. So let's dive into that a little bit, JT, and talk about that mindset and what your Protected by AI system does.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. We decided we were going to look at two sides of the coin. I'm always reminded it's not what you make, it's what you keep, right? And so you have to look at both. You have to look at being able to increase your efficiencies, your productivity, your profitability, your quality, your service, those things. But you also have to secure the castle, because if not, what's the good of it all? And that's what we really decided to do, was say, how could we be able to leverage, scale the same sorts of technologies that I built when I was at Time Inc., at Samsung, with the Intel community, with these, as you can imagine, massive budgets. What we realized was the average company, and average quote unquote, right, the small, the mid-sized company, the real companies that enable not just the American economy, but the world economy, are being increasingly left behind. And how are they being left behind? Because these Goliaths have all the assets, all the capabilities to do these things. Forrester Research came out a couple of years ago and said that AI-enabled companies will take $1.6 trillion from their less capable peers by the end of this year. That's the biggest economic shift in history. We're seeing it happen right in front of it. It's being catalyzed by COVID, by the need for, or the lack of need for co-location, by competition, by these companies that have the budgets to invest in this tech. And so what we said was, you know what? We take in our company what's called a microservices architectural approach. In plain English, we build little Lego building blocks of all the components you need for these sophisticated AI-enabled solutions, and we snap them together. And that allows us to customize, to calibrate, to give customers, clients, even countries that we work with, those same capabilities that they would otherwise have to invest tens of millions, hundreds of millions. I spent, when I was on the executive committee of Time Inc., when I was chief data scientist for Samsung, tens and hundreds of $millions to build these things. Well, once you've built the component, you can leverage some of these capabilities again. And so that's what we did for that side of our house. But then we saw the other side had an unmet need. You know, the SolarWinds hack was a real wake-up call for Brian and I. We're working with a couple of government entities, and we saw the ravages of what this could do, what kind of impact what is called a supply chain attack could have. And so the short version is we put our heads together and we solved it. We came up with a process with a capability that we have already brought to patent, that we have applied for patent, that we have built, we've developed, and we are now delivering to clients, to companies, to countries around the world to keep their software safe. And that is a capability we call CodeLock.
I love it. I love it. So here we go. There was probably one of the biggest hacks in the history of the world, the SolarWinds attack. You and, of course, Brian got together and were talking either by the phone or in person, and you decided that you wanted to do something about it. And you put your heads together and you said to yourselves, you know, if we do A, B, and C and put our heads together, we might be able to come up with something to stop future SolarWinds type hacks.
Well, and let me say, isn't that what entrepreneurs do, right? There's this myth in the general public that entrepreneurs look for opportunity. I don't think they do. I think they look for pain. And I think entrepreneurs look for pain and how you can resolve it and how you can come up with a way to help your potential clients, help a market, help people overcome those obstacles, those pains, those things that get in their way. And so, yeah, that's exactly what we did. And by the way, phone call or real life. Literally, I was working out in my home gym, 6 a.m. He's working out at his own gym. It occurs to me, and we're texting back and forth, and we end up sitting in our respective home gyms till I think it was 8:30 in the morning. By 9:30, we had our patent lawyers on the phone with us, and we were ready to go.
I love it, JT. It's such a great story. So, Brian, take us inside that conversation, because that's an aha moment that you and JT had. You're talking about the SolarWinds hack. You're both in your home gyms. You're both working out. You're both ready to go. And all of a sudden, you get on the phone with JT. So let's talk about what I call the aha moment. Take us inside that phone call so other entrepreneurs can sort of see the process of having an aha moment and then putting it into play.
Sure. Before we get into the phone call, I think I need to take you 24 hours back so you understood where the mindset was going and why we were really thinking through this problem. So one of our clients that we were working with was the Department of Homeland Security. And we had a meeting set up the following day, actually with their executive committee. So working with the undersecretaries and some of their C-suite on different issues. And the issue we were focused on was actually one of our other products. It had to do with supply chain and understanding where parts and pieces of materials and products were coming from. And so as JT and I were planning for that meeting, knowing that SolarWinds just happened, I mean, the largest cyber attack, ever, we both, looked at each other and said, from a strategy perspective, hey, we're going into this meeting. They're not going to hear a word we have to say about our supply chain product. It happens to be that SolarWinds is called a supply chain attack, although those were two separate things. So really, we just started thinking, and I had mentioned my background, but I have a master's degree in cybersecurity and computer forensics, and JT has been coding on a computer since before I was born. So really coming at this from a security perspective and a computer programming perspective, and us both putting on our law enforcement hats, it allowed us, I think, to see the problem from a different perspective. Most of these people are trying to attack this issue either directly from the cybersecurity side or directly from the computer programming side, but very few people, I think, have the experience and the perspective that we both had coming to that. So now fast forwarding to the next day when we're in the gym, a little tidbit that's worth adding. JT and I have a ownership in a fitness entity, so we're partaking in what we call the Founders Fat Off. And over a course of a year, we're trying to see who can lose the most weight and kind of counter the impacts of COVID. So us being in the gym every morning is important due to our pride. But with that being said, he sends me a text and he just asked me a series of questions. He said, Brian, put your law enforcement hat on. And he said, when you go to a crime scene, what's the first thing you do? And, my response was simple. I look for evidence. And JT says, okay, well, what do you do with the evidence? Well, I tag it and I photograph it and I ultimately put it in a container. And he said, exactly. Well, then what do you do with the container? And I said, well, I sign it and I start a chain of custody. And JT just stopped. And that's when the text went to the phone call. And he said, exactly. Why are we not doing that with computer code? Why are we not doing that with software? And that was the aha moment. It was something that was so basic and so simple that wasn't being done. So as JT had mentioned, at that point in time, I said, well, we'll stop right there. This is brilliant. I need to get our attorneys on the phone. And, I don't want to take one step in the wrong direction, until we know that we're legally covered. And this was about a week before Christmas, and credit to our attorneys and JT and the technical team. But we had our write-ups done and everything filed within that week. And we were able to then go back to DHS and say, all right, here you go. Here's it all on paper. And, what do you think? And we were surprised, but grateful that DHS actually came back with an endorsement. We have that public, and we'll talk a little bit about the book that we just published, but right on the front of it, we make sure to highlight that, which is something that we're very proud of.
Brian, that's an amazing story. You're helping so many companies weather the storm with your technology. You're helping so many smaller companies afford the same type of technology and AI as Fortune 500 companies. You and JT really have come on to the scene with something very important that you're calling Code Lock. JT, let me turn the conversation to your end of the dynamic duo team just for a minute, JT, because you have a new book that's become an Amazon bestseller very, very quickly. It's an incredible book, and I love it because it's called Stay Cyber Safe, and it really is written so that CEOs have an understanding of what they should know about cybersecurity. So it was really brilliant to write this book as well. Maybe take us inside your and Brian's thought process with regard to writing the book, maybe in conjunction with what's happening at Code Lock to make sort of like a perfect strategy for your business.
Yeah, and thank you so much. We're pretty proud of the book. And the reason we're proud of it is, again, in the spirit of entrepreneurialism, it was to meet an unmet need, meet a pain, and address the pain. Brian and I kept having our colleagues, clients, companies coming to us after SolarWinds and saying, frankly, what is all this stuff? What they're talking, TCP, IP, and this and that. And I don't even know what people are talking about. And one of the things that I've gained some notoriety for is a capability to make complex concepts comprehensible, clearly, quickly, cogently. And so turning gobbledygook into plain English. I speak English as my first language, and I think I can translate tech into that. And so Brian and I, and Brian has very much the same skill, and he and I were being inundated. We were spending so much time on calls, holding people's hands and trying to explain to particularly senior level executives who tend to be very, very, very bright people, but they don't necessarily have the technical acumen, and this isn't their arena. And so they want it explained in a way they can get their head around. And so our guide has always been to make things so simple, even a CEO can understand it, right? Brilliant people, but they don't care about the technology. And we kept explaining this, and we finally said, Brian said to me, why don't you just write some of this down, what you're talking about, in an email so I can communicate some of this, of what you're saying, because I think it adds so much to what I say about this. Okay, and I did. And he said, well, what about this? And what about, and he kept asking me in emails. And finally, I said, what do you want me to write, a book? And he said, let's do that. And we did. And literally, we sat down that day and we started to crank out a book. And we said, let's give them none of the nonsense, but what they actually need to know. What you need to know to stay cyber safe if you're a CEO or a senior executive, and so that you can have a meaningful conversation with your chief technology officer, with your chief information security officer, with those vendors who always come with some magical product. How do you talk to them? And we also decided we would use that as a vehicle to explain this invention of Code Lock. And we would do that not to be self-serving, although it certainly does serve our need to be able to talk about our product and what we're bringing, but to explain that there are really, when you talk about getting hacked, there are really 3 different kinds of attacks, and this is the solution for this type of attack. If you're a software developer, if you develop code for yourself or for your clients or customers, you can no more be without this invention than you could be without shoes walking outside in the winter. And here's what it's really all about in very plain English.
I love it, JT. It makes all the sense in the world. You've got the robot over your right shoulder from Lost in Space, which I love. And you're kind of like the Will Robinson of the forensic IT space, helping so many people out. It's really amazing. So that's one of my favorite shows going back, and I'm showing my age a little bit, but I'm talking about Lost in Space when it was in black and white many years ago.
Danger Will Robinson.
I love it. I love it. Now, Brian, let's talk a little bit about this storm that's happening with some companies out here they're trying to figure out how to weather the storm. Some of them are having challenges. Some of them are having challenges because of COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns, but others are having challenges with trying to figure out how to weather the storm with their IT solutions, and how not to get hacked, and how not to get locked down, and how not to get, a ransomware attack. So Brian, maybe you could sort of talk about how these companies can navigate and weather this current storm that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely happy to talk about that. It was funny when you were talking about, Danger Will Robinson. When you get a copy of the book, and I know you've seen it, you'll know that we actually have a chapter where we highlight that and highlight that robot in there. So that's great. But yeah, when we're talking about how to weather this storm, people don't realize, but right now there's about a little over 3 million, somewhere between 3 to 3.5 million shortage in cybersecurity talent around the world. And that figure is a 2020 figure pre-COVID. And so now you have all of these businesses, ours included, that has pushed to a virtual environment. And you have these networks that have expanded, these people that are now remote, even governments, and government personnel that are no longer working in an isolated environment. So the threat and the problem related to IT and related to cybersecurity is only growing and only getting worse. And so, our approach is how can we take the tools that we have and help them? How can we sit down with the CEO or CFO, anybody in that executive role, and say, hey, listen, you have a fiduciary responsibility. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your company, to your shareholders, to your investors, and to your customers. And how can we help you succeed in doing what you need to do? How can we help you sleep at night so you're not worried about becoming the next SolarWinds or being that headline on CNN or Fox in a negative light? If you look at what happened on the ticker symbol for SolarWinds, the day that this happened, I mean, it just dropped, and we want to help companies prevent that. If you're a business, you have a 48% chance, 48%, it's a flip of a coin in getting attacked. And so it's really something that people can't avoid and not focus on in today's world. And we wanted to be able to bring a product and a solution that could help them solve that issue.
Yeah,
and that's incredible, Brian. 48% chance. Brian, I want to stay with you just for a minute, and then I want to bounce back to JT. So, Brian, when we talk about onboarding, maybe
Sure.
you could tell us a little bit about the onboarding process for a company to get engaged with your company over at ProtectedBy.AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna the CodeLock is a SaaS solution, so it's available online. You can either access it via our website, which is ProtectedBy.AI, or it's going to have it does have its own dedicated website, which is just CodeLock.it. So CodeLock.it. Easy to remember and easy to go to. And just like any other software as a service, you can go online. Select what your need is based on how many developers you have, and move forward with the ordering and onboarding process. Really, it's a 5-minute effort to go on and go through the sign up piece. If you're a larger entity, we do have enterprise options, and we'll have one of our sales team representatives get in touch with you to see how they can customize both the solution set and pricing. But it's pretty simple to use, pretty easy to use. And our goal was to make it really effortlessly accessible to our clients.
Incredible. It's so awesome. It's a SaaS model. It's easy to engage. It's easy to get on the website and get going. JT, I know you and Brian built it that way. JT, when we think about startup entrepreneurs and we talk about startup companies, is there one thing, JT, that they should be mostly concerned about in terms of security and risk management right now?
Yeah, I think that is the question of the day. I think so many small companies figure I'm too small to be bothered with. They're going to go after, the banks, and they're going to go after the big boys. 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses, not mid, small. If you're a small or a mid, you are in the crosshairs. Why? Frankly, you probably don't have a chief information security officer that's costing you $300,000 a year if you're a small or mid-sized company. You don't have a full what's called security operations center. You don't have a budget for 3 million, 5 million, 6 million. And by the way, the average that companies are paying is about $6 to $8 million a year for cybersecurity. You can't afford that, which means you're an easy target. You're who they're going to come after. And talk about, not only do you have that exposure, there was recently a study done by University of Maryland over at the Clark School, and they found that a hack attack occurs every 39 seconds. Every 39 seconds, a significant. And this isn't some kid at a keyboard in his mom's basement. This is becoming big business, right? The hackers are starting to get together. They're forming consortia. There are nation states that are going after not just state secrets, but engaging in corporate espionage, pure theft. And when you talk about all the criminals that are allied out there, Brian had made the point, COVID has become a catalyst for all this. Why? You have brilliant people all over the world that are unemployed. We talk about hundreds of thousands of jobs that have shut down. All you need to hack is access basically to a $200 Chromebook and an internet connection. And Brian doesn't like me to talk about it, but I started out as a hacker. You put me in front of a keyboard and I will be in your system. I don't do that sort of thing anymore, but the good hackers will tell you that no system is pretty much unhackable. You can get in anywhere. We've solved the problem for software developers and for the code itself, but we can't spoon feed those solutions to our clients. The clients have to take that responsibility. To Brian's point, you have to act as a responsible fiduciary. And the final thing on this, we live in an age where every company has become a data company. And we have worked with companies everywhere from medicine to mining to manufacturing. Everybody is about the data. If you're not taking data seriously, if you're not optimizing on those assets, and if you're not protecting those assets, I'll argue you're failing in your responsibility to all those stakeholders, whether they're your investors, your customers, your employees, or even yourself.
That's unbelievable, JT. This has become, unfortunately, a multi-billion dollar business. You have the bad actors, whether they're state-sponsored or not, that build this terrible, infective software to go out, and then they hire affiliates, and they tell the affiliates to go infect computer systems, and they take a piece of the action. And while those affiliates are sending out this bad virus or this bad code, the original guys that are putting together the bad software, they go build something else so that when the old one sort of doesn't work anymore, they are ready now to give new ones to the affiliate. So it's absolutely a cat and mouse game. Is that what's going on, JT?
That's exactly right. And to your point, one of the stats that we cite in the book that, frankly, Brian and I had to go back and check it 5 times because we couldn't even believe it. By the end of this year, cybercrime collectively will be the 3rd largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Right after the US and China, displacing Japan as the 3rd largest economy. Now, we understand it's not just one enterprise yet, but when you talk about organized crime and talk about the changes we saw, even following prohibition in the United States, right? Look at the drug cartels. What is inevitably next? We're going to see increasing cartels around cybercrime. We're already seeing it. We're seeing this sort of cybercrime dynamic of these enterprises coming together. And what does that do? They get more and more sophisticated, more and more capable, greater access, greater resources. They already collectively are the 3rd largest economy on the planet. And I'll tell you, government has proven to be largely helpless in fighting this. Not just our government, all governments. It's the nature of the beast of how we created the internet. It's probably one of the greatest inventions in history, but it also has exposed us. And so we have to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and keeping ourselves safe.
That's very insightful, JT, and thank you so much for that. I want to bounce back to Brian, and I know that you only have cut out a certain amount of time for me. I could stay on the show with both of you for a number of hours, but I know you guys are helping so many companies with their cybersecurity. What you've been able to do with your code lock is absolutely incredible. I know you're selling off the shelves with your book, Stay Cyber Safe, which is just very, very interesting. It's an Amazon bestseller already, so congratulations on that. Yeah. Brian, I want to turn the discussion here at the end of the time that you've allotted toward entrepreneurship, because we do have entrepreneurs that are watching the show. And Brian, what do you say to the entrepreneurs from your particular mindset with your background, really in life and death situations, both you and JT? What do you say to the entrepreneurs that are having a tough time? What do you say to the entrepreneurs that, are coming up across a pothole or a roadblock and they can't quite figure out how to get through it or around it, and maybe they need a little encouragement? Is there something from your background and experience of what you told us, which is just fascinating, going back prior to 9/11 with the homeless story, and you and JT both share something similar in that regard, but then you took 9/11 and you empowered yourself to become what you've become. How do you share with the younger entrepreneurs now what they can do to keep on pushing when the going gets tough?
No, absolutely. So both my background with the Secret Service and JT's and Special Forces, we had what was called a no-fail mission. And so when we would go to work, or when I would go to work, I couldn't fail. Me failing meant the President of the United States died. And that just wasn't acceptable. And it hadn't happened since JFK, and we weren't going to allow it to happen on our watch. And so having that mindset and taking that mindset into business and taking that mindset into entrepreneurship is really, I think, where the core is for both me and JT. And, a direct example of that has been related to COVID. And listen, we're a small business. The last year has not been easy. And we've had to find ways to fight through it. And the word, pivot comes to mind. We haven't changed strategy. We've pivoted with the times. We've looked at, where we can do better and do more. And like any type of, mission or plan or business strategy, there's not always one path, right? So, when one door closes, we always have an option to go through another. And if that door doesn't work, we'll jump through the window. And that's really how we focus what we do and the way we think about both business and life.
I love it, Brian. It makes all the sense in the world. That's incredible. I'd like to say goodbye to both of you and thank you both individually. JT, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show today. When you get a worldwide leader in anything, it's very, very intriguing. Here at the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series, and Dr. Kostman being a worldwide leader in the field of artificial intelligence and cognitive thinking, it was just a delight to hear your perspective. And what I really loved about it, JT, was the fact that you've been able to co-author this book with Brian and break down this very technical, sort of complicated thing into a book that's easily read by CEOs throughout the world so they really can understand what's going on in their business. JT, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, been my honor and privilege. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Brian, of course, you're a trailblazer in the field of security and risk management. You and JT have put together an amazing business with your code lock technology at ProtectedBy.AI. Your stories are incredible. The fact that you and JT collaborated, many, many years ago and actually saved a president's life, President Obama, is incredible. Wow, this is a story that just needs to be told, what you and JT are doing together. Brian, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show and putting this together for all of us to speak today. It's been absolutely an honor.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the time and look forward to speaking with you again.